Ukraine has launched one of its largest drone attacks on Russia as Moscow continues its own heavy strikes on Ukrainian cities. But Ukraine is also facing a critical shortage of air defense interceptors. Joining us today on TVP World to assess where the war is heading is MacKay, former lecturer at the University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you.
So looking at this latest strike, Ukraine has just launched one of its largest drone attacks on Russia. What can Kyiv achieve strategically with operations of this scale?
I think they can do two things strategically. First of all, they're continuing to hit oil refineries, oil depots, transshipment terminals. And we know that this is Russia's largest export market. In fact, as a result of these strikes, Russia has had to shut down this export market, at least in gasoline and diesel, and began importing these, and there's shortages throughout Russia. And most importantly, the oil and gas industry supplies the fuel and lubricants for the Russian invasion army. So this has prime military importance. The other aspect of these strikes is more against the strategic infrastructure of Russia, its logistics, and notably these strikes on Wildberries logistics hubs, these large warehouses. And it's estimated that Ukraine has now hit and destroyed or heavily damaged 10 of the largest 17 Wildberries warehouses. And what this does is it brings the war home to Russians because they have more immediacy with this, the buyers and sellers and so on of this distribution company, and it also imposes a severe financial strain on the Russian financial system, banking. It's estimated that a bankruptcy of Wildberries would create a financial crisis that even the Kremlin would not be able to cover up.
Right. Do you think there's a point where these Ukrainian deep strikes begins to degrade Russians' ability to wage war rather than just imposing disruption and additional costs?
I think they already are. So, for example, the strikes on oil refineries and terminals and depots has already taken away a lot of the Russians' ability to carry out mechanized warfare. We haven't seen anything like the mechanized assaults we saw in 2022, for example, and we're not going to see these. We don't see large gains by the Russians. We see mostly small and symbolic gains of flag-raising episodes. And the vehicles, such as we see them, are things like motorcycles and quad bikes and things like this. There's very little armor left, and partly that's being out of fuel.
Now, recently we've seen Ukraine expand its strategical reach, but its own air defense is also coming under stress as well. Which side of the equation do you think matter more at this stage of the war?
At this stage of the war, Ukrainian strikes matter more because of what the Russians are choosing to target. For example, last night, Russia used 3 missiles to destroy a large book market in Kiev. Now, this target is of no military importance, and it's not even of strategic importance to Ukraine's defense. This is a part of Russia's genocidal war against the Ukrainian people to destroy their language and culture. Just to use expensive missiles against a target like that means that since they're finite, they're not being used against strategic and military targets of Ukrainian defenders. So while this is horrific, it is a war crime, and it is a part of genocide, it does not affect Ukraine's ability to defend to the extent that Ukrainian strikes on military and strategic objects affects Russia's ability to attack and invade.
Right. At the meantime, though, we also see Russians tossing drones and ballistic missiles in Ukrainian cities and pounding Ukrainian cities as well. Now, President Zelensky has talked about the lack of Patriot interceptors. How dire is the situation if the shortage just persists?
It's pretty dire. But I want to point out that the shortage is in these anti-ballistic missile interceptors. In other words, where Ukraine does not yet have domestic capacity. Ukraine has learned after the last 4 years of full-scale invasion and 12 and a half years of war that its allies or partners are wholly unreliable. And that's why Ukraine developed its anti-drone interceptors and is now has an interception rate that is better than it was before, even though the Russians are sending hundreds every night and day as well, and carrying out a human safari in places like Kherson and Kharkiv, which is horrific. But the downside is on the anti-ballistic missile. And unfortunately, Ukraine, and I would say most of Europe, have been fooled by the Americans that the Patriot system with its PAC-3 interceptors is the only way to go. Now, Ukraine has learned the lesson of the Americans' untrustworthiness and is rapidly developing an anti-ballistic missile initiative. But it's a race to see if it can even be online by the winter. The Europeans, the west of Ukraine, I have no idea what they're doing. They're not exerting any kind of effective pressure on the Americans to deliver PAC-3 interceptors to Ukraine. And they're not really serious with a sense of urgency about developing their own anti-ballistic missile defense. If Russia were to attack any other Ukrainian country, NATO or not, they would be pretty helpless in the current state of warfare. So Ukraine learned they got to go on their own. Unfortunately, that means over the next few months, we're going to see these ballistic missile attacks by the Russian terrorist state increase, civilian casualties increase. It will be horrific, but it will not break the resolve of Ukrainians to defend their country.
Right, this also highlights the importance of air defense capabilities as well. Now, another thing that we've seen reports of is, of course, we've known since a very long time that North Koreans have been supporting Russia. But can you help us paint a picture of the scale we're looking at here? How much has North Korea's support already changed Russia's ability to continue and to sustain this war in terms of ammunitions, via missiles, or manpower?
Well, it's been very large scale for at least 3 years. It started with large shipments of artillery shells in volumes far greater than Ukraine can produce domestically, and even with things like the Czech Republic's artillery initiative to provide shells, all of Western allies were unable to match what North Korea could do. Then North Korea sent troops at first into Kursk region in Russia, and so they're on that front, making incursions into Sumy region, Ukraine, and then ballistic missiles and their launchers. So it's incredibly significant because to me, it shows that Russia, the invader, has fighting allies that are willing to make sacrifices. And Ukraine, on the other hand, has not a single fighting ally, not a single country that will put its armed forces on the battlefield to defend Europe alongside Ukrainians. So I think that this highlights this bizarre, extreme appeasement environment that we're living in now, that to me spells certainly the death of Europe as we've seen it, the structure that existed since 1945. And really not good news for the future as long as Europe continues to procrastinate and deny that it is at war with Russia.
All right. Last but not least, I'm wondering whether we're reaching at a stage where industrial capacity and manpower, these attrition is going to become more important than just individual moments in the front line. Are we seeing a race when it comes to production capabilities, allies, manpower?
Absolutely. And let's not forget that this economic factor has been telling in European wars for centuries. The blockade the British put on Napoleon, and the way in the Second World War that in particular the United States, but also the British Commonwealth, outproduced the Nazis in a profound way, which made a difference, especially towards the end of the war. So I think we're seeing the same pattern, and that the West can draw on vastly greater resources than Russia can. Russia is already totally devoted its economy to war, and it can't take two small regions in the east of Ukraine. So I think if the political will is there, the production capacity of the West vastly exceeds the economic equation of the Second World War, for example.
Right. So we'll definitely have to see whether
Russia
or not these political will be carried out. In the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World News Tonight. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.